It's strange to me when you're a marginalized voice already and you choose to ignore other marginalized voices. Like, you know what it's like to feel like you're erased or your voice is unheard. So I think when other communities do that to other people, it breaks my heart, because it's like, what, like, you know what this is like, so why would you do that to us?
Hey there, and welcome to In Sickness and in Health, a podcast about the intersections with chronic illness, disability, healthcare, and mortality. My name is Keah Brown. I'm not a doctor or a medical professional. I'm just a person and a patient who really wants to talk about this stuff more. Nothing said on this show should ever be considered medical advice. If you're experiencing a medical issue, please seek qualified medical help. I know the system sucks, but I wish you a lot of luck. Every person is different, even within disease groups, so none of my guests should ever be regarded as official representatives or spokespersons for their conditions. Please respect their very personal choices, and unless they ask for it, please don't make suggestions about treatments or lifestyle changes. Unsolicited medical advice is never not annoying. In today's episode, I talked to Keah Brown about her writing, growing up disabled with an able-bodied twin sister, learning to be nice to ourselves, visibility, not seeing herself as a Black disabled woman represented in media, and what Keah plans to do about it. In this week's bonus episode, we talk about mental health, writing to connect, and working remotely as a bridge to employment for some people with disabilities. Before we get into the interview, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who has donated via PayPal and Patreon to help me with the production costs for the show. It's a huge help and really helps me keep the podcast coming and improve quality where I can, while I still try and figure out the intricacies of recording people in their natural environments, either in person or via Skype. Most recently, I was able to replace my headphones, which have always been way too heavy for my head and aggravated my neck problems. So special shout outs to Katie, Chelsea, Christine, and Jennifer, who have all made generous one-time donations via PayPal, and to Stanford, the person, not the university, Laura and Katie, for becoming patrons over at Patreon, which enables small, recurring donations on a per-episode basis. I long neglected our Patreon, but I'll be using it a lot more now. There are different pledge levels that come with different rewards, and I'll be sending those out soon to those who have already pledged. Patrons who support the podcast also get access to the patron-only feed, on which I'll be sharing some more behind-the-scenes stuff in the months to come. If you want to help out by donating or in some other fashion, like I'm always looking for people to help with episode transcription, check out insicknesspod.com/donate for links to our PayPal and Patreon pages, including a video in which I describe exactly how Patreon works. You can also find resources and more from us at insicknesspod.com and on social media at insicknesspod. Find Keah and her writing online at keahbrown.weebly.com and on Twitter at Keah Maria. Check out the episode page for links to some of the stuff we talk about in this episode. If you can, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on iTunes. It helps other people find the show. And I hope you enjoy this episode.
Like, I'm gonna give you a time frame. Elementary school, well, I was in like Head Start, so from like Head Start to maybe 4th grade, 5th grade, I had no idea that I had a disability. None. Like, I literally convinced myself, like, young me was like, oh, you're just like everybody else. Like, nobody pointed it out, nobody said anything. And then when I got to middle school, I've told this story before in an essay, but I got to middle school and there was this kid in the lunchroom, and he was following me around and mocking me, but I didn't know because I hadn't looked behind me. And then when I realized it, I was like, holy shit, like, you're not walking like everybody else, you don't look like everybody else, like, there's something wrong there. And so from that point on, I internalized that sort of like hatred, like, you're different and it's wrong. And I remember like my friends and even people that like I didn't really talk to that much, like chastised this kid for it, and he only did it like once. And but I still like I kept that. I kept it, and I was like, this is a reason to hate yourself. And so I kind of stuck with that from then on to like, now. I feel like it's like that one mean comment when everybody's being so nice about something. You always remember that, and then you just like you seem to block out every other compliment because you see that one nasty thing and you hold on to that.
Yeah.
Which is the stress thing, but
I know. I'm way too familiar with that. It drives me nuts.
yeah. And it's like you can recognize that you're doing it, but for some reason you can't stop yourself.
Yeah, because if one person feels this way, everyone must feel this way.
Yeah. Like it's a weird thing where like sometimes I've convinced myself that like people are being nice just because they feel bad for me. That's very much a thing too. Like somebody will compliment my work on the internet, and I'm like, oh, I believe you. Like I believe that you feel that way, but I also worry that you'll read it once and you'll like it, but then you'll read it again and you'll be like, oh, this is kind of trash. And like I was just saying that because I felt like I needed to, I feel like I definitely still struggle with that, like believing people when they say that they enjoy my work or something.
Yeah, I think that's fairly common among creative types or like people that make things, however you want to phrase that. There was a moment for you where everything kind of changed.
Absolutely.
I find that really interesting because so many people, it's like a slow dawning over time. But for you, there was a moment where everything just kind of clicked in.
Yeah, a singular moment. And it's so funny because, like, I literally remember, like, I remember the kid's name and everything. It just all hit me at once. And I remember, like, I came home that day and I was crying to my mom. And I was like, Mom, like, what's wrong with me? Like, why didn't you tell me? And she was like, well, sweetie, I thought you knew. Like, I thought you were aware that you have a disability. And she was so kind about it and so sweet. And she sat me down and she was talking to me about how, like, I wasn't to be defined by my disability. And, I grew up, she raised me and my twin sister who's able-bodied and my older brother who's able-bodied. And she raised us all to be, equal. Like, when they got rollerblades, I got rollerblades. When they got scooters, I got scooters. They got bikes, I got bikes. So it was like, she raised us so that I never felt like I was different from them. And I'm thankful for that in a lot of ways, but I'm also, like, now that I'm older, I'm like, like, I appreciate that so much, but I'm also like, crap. I wish I would have known, like, I wish I would have recognized it earlier so that when that happened, I wouldn't have internalized it and, like, made it a thing that made me, like, open the door for me to just dislike my body.
Yeah. Like, I really liked your essay, My Confidence, My Camera Phone, and My Cerebral Palsy, that you have on Femsplain. In it, you say, quote, in a perfect world, I would just talk myself out of my contempt for my body. I would wake up one morning, look in the mirror, and say, I am beautiful, and actually believe it. I would kiss each deformed bone in my body and dismantle the patriarchy, all before checking my morning emails. In a perfect world, I could do all of those things, but in this world, this real world, I can't. Not yet. I want my friends and family to see what I see, to love what I love about each and every one of them. I just haven't figured out how to transfer those hopes for them back to the person sending them out. That really stood out to me because it resonates with me so much. That.
Oh, I'm glad. I mean, I'm not glad, but yeah. I'm glad that you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, I'm glad that you enjoyed the piece.
Yeah, and that piece, or that excerpt specifically really stood out to me because I feel very much the same way. Like, you're talking about how you wish that you could, like, see the good in your writing and actually believe people when they compliment it. And here I am on the other side being like, no, but seriously, it's actually really good.
No, I mean, like, I think my thing is that, like, I've convinced myself that even after it's published and done and people compliment it, like, I believe them, but I think sometimes I can't see the worth in the work, so I, like, put that on other people.
Right.
So it's not so much, anybody else, it's me.
Right.
I love that essay, and I love Femsplain. I tell them all the time, I'm like, I love you guys. They were the first place that accepted one of my essays, and it was about my sister, and I was just apologizing to her because I spent so much of, like, our shared childhood being jealous of her and hating her because she had the body that I wanted, and I felt like it was unfair that God gave her the body that I so desperately felt like I should have had too, so that they were the first people to publish that essay. And I think with the filter one, in particular with that quote, I'm one of those people that very much chooses to tell their friends and family all the time. I'm like, I love you. You look great. Here's what I love about you. Here's what you look great in. You should wear that. Go on your dates. Talk to that boy you like. Talk to that girl you like. You're so awesome constantly, because I feel like, well, one, they are, and two, I feel like people need to be reminded, and so I'm very good at, like, saying to someone, hey, I love this about you, and this is great, and you should love this, and you should do this, and you can do that, and whatever you dream or whatever, then I'm sure you can achieve it. But I'm not so good at, like, saying that to myself. Like, I can say it, but I'm not going to believe it. So I think that's where that quote came from.
Yeah. You're everybody's biggest cheerleader except yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel that way all the time. Because I love being, like, I don't know, in the presence of greatness is, like, a weird way to phrase that. But
I get what you're saying.
Yeah, like, I have all of these, like, super duper talented friends who do all of these amazing things and are beautiful in all different sorts of ways, and I'm like, yes, you guys are great. And then when it comes to, like, my relationship with myself and being nice to myself, I have such a hard time doing this thing that I'm doing almost constantly outwardly, trying to do it inwardly.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I'm the exact same way. And my friends, like, they'll call me out on it. They'll be like, Keah, no. Say what you just said to me to yourself. And I'll be like, I can't. This isn't about me right now, okay? This is about you. So, like, I'll try and, like, joke my way around it, but I realize that it's happening, and I just seem to, like, I can't seem to bypass that part of me that's like, say this to yourself. Especially my sister. The other day, she was going out to dinner with her boyfriend, and she had on the cutest outfit, and her hair was gorgeous, and so I was, like, telling her how great she looked, and she pauses in the mirror, and she's like, I wish you would tell yourself that. And then I just, like, stopped, and I was like, here you go. And she went on this whole speech about how she wants me to see myself the way that I see her. And it was, like, this whole long conversation, and it was just so funny because I'm like, I understand that I need to do it, I just don't know how.
Yeah. Something that I've been trying to, like, practice for the last year or so is, like, just trying to interrupt myself and stop myself when I'm saying terrible things to myself. Like, I'll find myself thinking something and then just say, like, if you wouldn't say that to somebody that you love, and I never would, almost ever, like, don't say it to yourself, which has helped actually a lot, but it took a lot of practice. I'm still working on it, and I haven't made it all the way back around to actually saying nice things to myself yet, but
that's a step.
Yeah, I think this is the kind of thing that just takes time and practice and all that sort of stuff. We want it to be, like, easy and instant, but of course it isn't. I mean, we've spent our whole lives talking to ourselves in one way, so to like try and do a total about face and talk to ourselves in a completely different way is a little bit unreasonable expectation, but
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So that's interesting that you have a twin sister and that you have that. I read that essay too, which was also very touching and kind of hard to read. I mean, like, in the best possible way, It's just interesting that you grew up with a twin, you have these kind of like parallel lives that are completely different.
Yeah, I think it's so I feel like I spend a lot of time now apologizing to her because I wish that I could properly explain to you without I mean, I was a total bitch. I was like a total bitch to her all of our lives until I got to, like the essay says, like college. I was rotten. I was so mean. And like I would tear her down because I felt like I would say to her the things that I felt about myself because I was like, oh, well, if I make her feel like shit, then I'll feel less like shit myself. But in reality, I always felt even more like shit because in the end, it wasn't making anyone feel better. I was just making both of us feel worse. And I remember, like, I wrote it and I told her that I was writing an essay that she was going to be mentioned in, right? But I didn't tell her what it was going to be about. So she was at work when she read it. And she's like, I'm in the bathroom right now crying. I love you so much. And I was like, I love you too. And it was this whole thing. And I feel like after I wrote the essay, our relationship kind of turned a corner. And I stopped being the person. Like, I mean, I had stopped being the person to to tear her down when I got to college. Because, I mean, I spent every single day of my life with this one single person from like before birth and on. And so I wasn't seeing her every day. And so I feel like us going away to two separate colleges really helped our relationship, but also when I stopped being a bitch, like it it helped us too. So I think me writing that essay was my way of apologizing to her, just in a more public way, so that like not only she knew, but everybody else knew that like I deserved to apologize to her for my behavior.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did your mom read it?
Yeah, she did. It was funny because she wanted me to read it to her.
Oh God.
She's one of those parents that's like, I think you should read it to me, and I'm like, Mom, I can't read this one to you. Like I just couldn't. And so she read it, and she came into my room and she hugged me, and then she hugged Leah, and she's like, I love you both, and I'm so proud of you, and I'm so glad that you wrote this and you took the time to apologize to your sister, et cetera, et cetera. So she was really happy with it. But yeah, she wanted me to read it to her, and I was like, no, I can't. I can't read that one to you, Mom.
Yeah, a little bit too much emotion wrapped up in that, I imagine.
Yeah. I'd have got to like maybe the third paragraph and just started crying. And she'd been like, okay, well, let me just read it myself. So yeah, she read it. I think she was like one of the last people to read it because she got home late that day or something. And everybody else had already read it because I posted it on Facebook and everybody else was like talking to her about it and she hadn't read it yet. And then she came home and she read it and she was like, oh goodness, this was so good. And I was like, oh, I feel better. Like I'm always so worried about my family's opinions of my essays and stuff. And so like I'm working on one now about hair that I'm like, I hope that I hope that they like it. But at the end of the day, like I have to write it even if they don't, So I'm trying to work through that sort of pressure as well. It's like writing something regardless of how it might make other people feel.
Yeah. Yeah, that's always something to consider when you're writing like personal, emotional stuff, especially when you're like writing about other people or those other people are in the story in some way. It's a delicate thing.
It is. It's like a fine line to walk. You don't want to give too much of that person away to the public without their knowledge, and you also don't want to cheapen the story. So when I sat Leah down, that's her name, Leah. When I sat her down to tell her, like, I was like, listen, you're going to be mentioned in this essay, and it's going to be about me and you and our relationship. And I was like, how okay are you with that? And she's like, I'm fine with it, write whatever you gotta write. I'm sure it's gonna be good. And then she just gave me free reign, but I feel like, if she had given me limitations, I obviously would have taken them into consideration. Because I do think that that's important. I agree.
Yeah, it's difficult. I'm trying to think of a way to transition, a very awkward transition into talking about like visibility. Like you said before, you didn't really realize that you were necessarily disabled until you saw it mirrored almost by somebody who was making fun of you. And visibility is something that I think about a lot. It's something that you write about a lot. being visibly disabled, but then you also talk about being a Black woman, and like there's so many layers there to visibility, invisibility, and like how all of that kind of rolls together in a big mess.
Well, I think that it is a really tough, there's a lot of intersections, I feel like, with my identity, and I didn't talk about them for so long that now I'm so gung-ho about it all. I'm like, yes, I want to talk about this as often as possible because I need it to be seen. And I think, and I mentioned this in my catapult essay, but I mentioned Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella, and I talk about how great that movie was and how much I love it because I love Brandy and Whitney Houston, and I loved seeing my skin, like on TV and in video reflected, and it was beautiful, and there was like nothing wrong with it, and it wasn't a sort of slave narrative, and it wasn't this, very often when you see Black people on TV, they're one of three things, okay? They're slaves, they're the help, or they're like criminals. And so I feel like for me, watching Rodgers and Hammerstein's Cinderella was like, okay, your Blackness is beautiful. I think if there's one thing about me that I've never, ever like questioned my love for, it was my Blackness. And so I think these movies are fantastic, and I grew up with a lot of representation as a Black woman, but I never really saw all of me. I still haven't seen, a Black person with a disability on TV in a light that isn't a Law and Order SVU episode that is quite frankly so problematic. And I love that show, but I think, so my biggest issue is that with representation, you always get one and not the other.
Right.
And so I think that with, my hope is that one day I can have both. Even if it is me, I'd like for somebody else to see somebody who's both a Black woman and a disabled person. Like, you can be both things, but it's just sad that you don't see both things. Like, I love Shonda Rhimes. I love Shonda Rhimes. I love Scandal. I love How to Get Away with Murder. I love Grey's Anatomy. But there's no Black women with disabilities. They're all able-bodied. They're all conventionally beautiful, and like, they're very awesome characters, and they're very like dimensional, and they're not just they're not just pretty. They have like complicated lives, and you don't see Black women with disabilities in those roles or any roles like those on television or in movies. And so I feel like that's the quote unquote hill I want to die on. I want to be seen fully, and I want people that are growing up like young Black women to see people with disabilities and see themselves in characters instead of only seeing their Blackness or only seeing, a white person on TV in a wheelchair as their representation of disability. That's my big to do about that.
If you're gonna die on a hill, that's a good one. It's one we need.
You follow me on Twitter. That's like every other tweet I'm bringing it up just because I see a lot of things. And so people will talk about the big picture. And like I said, I'm so happy to see people of color on TV and these fantastic, roles. But when you talk about the big picture, and I'm talking about the fact that I still don't see all of me on the screen, and you want me to stop talking about that just so that I can celebrate the fact that people of color are finally on TV in a non-criminal role, it's frustrating because I think that we should be able to have it all. And so I don't think that me having that conversation is derailing the other conversation. I think, in fact, it's enhancing it. I think that we have to critique the things we love, because if we don't, how do we love them? So that's my whole 2 cents on that.
Yeah, it's something that you've written about quite a lot, and I really look forward to reading more from you and from others about this topic because, like there's been this groundswell of like social justice movements and stuff in the last several years. Obviously, Black Lives Matter and, other stuff going on and conversations about intersectionality and diversity. And so rarely do those conversations actually also include the topic of disability.
Yeah, so rarely. And it's like when they do, it's a one-off line. Like it's like maybe like a line with maybe 4 words in it. They don't really, when they mention it, it's usually in response to somebody calling them out about it, and then there's nothing else done whatsoever. And it's like, we're out there too. Like sometimes I feel bad saying that just because like I'm only on Twitter, but I feel like even speaking out online, sometimes I get a lot of flack from people in my mentions with the disability to white hashtag that Melissa started. I got a lot of hate for those tweets. Sometimes I do feel guilty because it's not like I'm, out in the streets, like truly protesting. I'm just kind of like speaking about the issues on Twitter, but I think it's because I have limitations, as far as like where I can go and what I can do with protesting. So I spend a lot of my time like talking about it in essays and speaking out online. So sometimes I feel kind of like a fraud, but I think even then I still find it important to say something, because if I don't, nobody else will. And I just feel like I feel like I've spent so much time trying to distance myself from my disability and trying to prove, that I'm quote unquote not like other disabled people, that now I'm finally embracing the fact that, this is who I am. And even if I don't like my body, and even if I struggle with this disability every single day, and I'm not like throwing a parade for it or whatever, doesn't mean that I can't talk about the issues that, we as a community, or even, myself, because I can't speak for an entire people, but even myself, the stuff that I struggle with. And so I feel like even though sometimes I feel like a fraud, I feel like it's still important for me to speak out about these things.
Oh, absolutely. There's often within these movements, there are a lot of criticisms that come at people who are, quote unquote, armchair activists or slacktivists or like hashtag activists. And there's all sorts of like silly names for actively engaging in issues on the internet, and that sort of thing is just like inherently ableist because, like you pointed out, you have limitations. A lot of disabled people have limitations, and a lot of in-person show up and be there activism is not particularly accessible. I mean, even just the week that we're recording this is the week that the shooting in Orlando happened. And in one of my other episodes, I talked to Lee Thompson. He tweeted about trying to go to a vigil the other night and being reminded why he doesn't normally go to things like that, because they're so unfriendly to anyone with any physical limitations. It's not on purpose, it's just the very nature of that kind of gathering isn't particularly accessible. So unless somebody is actively working on making it accessible, which they so rarely do, it really winds up excluding a huge portion of people who do want to participate, who do want to show up and be there.
Exactly. I absolutely agree. And I think, first of all, I feel like I need to say, like, that shooting absolutely broke my heart. And I felt guilty then too, because I was so sad about it and so upset and so devastated for these people, but I felt like, it wasn't really my place to speak out on it because it's not my community, but I made sure to like retweet people and let people know which voices that they should be listening to. And it absolutely breaks my heart that somebody would show up to a club where queer people of color are celebrating themselves and loving themselves and celebrating who they are, just to take their lives. And it's just, the coverage of it on the news is very ableist and very, they've whitewashed the entire thing, and it just makes me sad for those people, because it wasn't just this, I don't know, I think that they seem to be taking out a lot of what's important about what happened out of the news coverage of it.
Right.
And that's what I think has upset a lot of, LGBTQ folks on my timeline, and like on my other, like on Tumblr and Facebook, etc. They've whitewashed the entire thing just so that they can sympathize with it or whatever, and it's just sad.
Yeah, it is sad. To co-opt this extraordinarily terrible event affecting queer people of color, like a very specific group of people who were in that very specific spot for a very specific purpose, and kind of taking all of that out of it is really definitely upsetting to see.
Yeah.
Like, it's not an accident that this guy
Absolutely
went to a gay club on Latin night. That's not a coincidence.
And yet every sort of coverage has just, they'll say it's a gay club, but they won't say what night it was. They won't even mention the fact that half of the victims, over half of the victims, were Latina or Latin, or however you say it. I'm gonna say it. It's terrible, but however you say it, like, those were people of color, and they've completely just bypassed that entirely. And it makes me feel like, and I don't know if I have a right to feel this way, but it makes me sad as a person of color in general, just because no matter what happens, it's like people of color, especially LGBTQ members of color, are often so far, like, they're so erased from their own narratives that it's like people are always like, oh, well, make your own stuff and do your own thing. And it's like, one, half of the time, we never have funding. They never want to fund anything that, like, a minority person makes. They never want to, like, you never get the same opportunities as you would if you're, like, white, heterosexual, and able-bodied. And it's like, people don't really, I guess when you have the privilege of ignoring that fact, then you do, but for the rest of us, it's really hard to watch.
Yeah.
Like another instance of where people are erased from their own narrative like that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Like you said, you don't know if you have the right to be upset about it, but all of this stuff is connected. Whether we're talking about the queer population, people of color, different cultural groups, all of this stuff is connected, and all of these, even within, so the disability to white hashtag is about people of color not seeing themselves represented in disability activism. There's also, like you've written about, not seeing yourself as a disabled person represented in things that do otherwise include your community. Or for a lot of queer people I know, queer disabled people, they don't feel like the disability issue is included in the queer community, but they also don't feel necessarily included in the disability community because they're queer. And it's like all this like complicated, mixed up things, but that common factor there that is people being erased from their own narratives.
Yeah, and I think it's so strange to me, because I think when most people fall under more than one
Right.
Identity. So I think it's strange to me when you're a marginalized voice already and you choose to ignore other marginalized voices. Like, what it's like to feel like you're erased or your voice is unheard. So I think when other communities do that to other people, it breaks my heart, because it's like, what, like, what this is like, so why would you do that to us?
Yeah.
Like, a lot of the trolls in my mentions during the disability to white hashtag were white disabled folks. They were like pissed off, and some of them were like, you're a embarrassment to the disability community, and we don't deserve this, and you're just trying to divide the community. And I'm like, no, I'm telling you the life that I've lived. You know what I mean? I'm saying, like, I don't know why I just felt this need to apologize, and then I caught myself, because I was like, this is my experience. This is what I live with every day, and I'm saying to you, like, this community that is marginalized already, don't erase people of color, especially Black people with disabilities. from the narrative, because we're here too, we exist as well. And it was just like a clusterfuck of folks that were like, listen, you're dividing the community, and I'm ashamed for you. I'm ashamed for you to be a part of this community.
Ugh.
And this whole hashtag is just a mistake, and you're going to regret it later. And I was like, first of all, I didn't start the hashtag. The hashtag was started by Valissa Thompson. She started the hashtag, and I was so grateful for that fact. And I don't know, I get so frustrated when I think about the fact that there were so many people in the community that were upset by my tweets and by that hashtag, when, like, what it's like to be erased from the regular narrative. So why would you then choose to demean people in the community who are speaking out about the fact that they're erased in the community? It just doesn't make any sense to me, is all.
Yeah, no, it's wild. I mean, I saw that happening too and found it really disconcerting. I mean, the community's already divided. That's the whole point of the hashtag, right?
Yeah.
Is that, like, already there's this division, and what a hashtag like that does is bring visibility, again, coming back to visibility, brings visibility to this issue that when you look at, the websites of a lot of nonprofit groups that serve people with disabilities, like the photo shoots of people chasing after butterflies, or like whatever, photos they have on the website, they're white people,
Yeah.
And that's not particularly helpful.
That's a problem, and they don't. And I think the thing that frustrates me is, like, even some of the stock photos that they used when they were talking to Valissa about the hashtag was just of white people. And I'm like, you're perpetuating the same exact thing that she was trying to work against when she created the hashtag. And it's and then there was a lot of people that were commenting on the articles and stuff, and they're like, well, I just think that they're making a big problem out of a small thing. And I'm like, it's not a small thing.
It's not a
for
small
those of us
thing.
of color who also have disabilities. It's so funny to me when people rush to dismiss a lived experience.
Yeah.
Just because it isn't theirs.
Yeah, it's really, I don't understand where that comes from. Like, I understand, not being necessarily open to hearing it, but to try and, like, it's one thing to cover your ears, it's another thing to, like, pour gasoline on it and light it on fire.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah. In your piece that you wrote about disability representation and inspiration porn for the toast, you talked about people saying that they don't even notice your disability. And you said, quote, telling me or other people with disabilities that our disability is something to forget is just as harmful as when my blackness is erased with the claim, I don't see color. The problem with dismissing or ignoring these things about me is that doing so feeds the idea that we should ignore the things that make us different, that we should feel shame and guilt just for acknowledging that we don't all share the same privileges or lived experiences. My blackness, like my disability, is something that everyone sees, and even on days where I wish the latter to fade away, it will always be there. And I just, in this conversation, that feels particularly relevant because people really are just, like, so in a rush to say, like, no, you're fine, you're just like everybody else. But, like, everybody is different, and those differences are important. And pointing them out doesn't have to be divisive. But when somebody points them out, and then other people react antagonistically. Is that even a word?
Yeah, that's a word, I think. I'm like, sure, it's fine. it's a word in my book.
Sure, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. Can you speak to that point?
So I guess this comes back to my earlier point in that we are a people who have multiple identities. We're not just one singular person all the time. So I think it bothers me when, like it says in the essay, it bothers me when people, dismiss my disability, because it's like I'm still trying to learn to love it. You know what I mean? Or even like it. I don't need to. I just need to like it. And so I'm still learning how to do that. But I think when it's dismissed like that, it gives me more reason to just internalize that dismissal and hate and, like, give me another reason to dislike it, because you saying that you don't see it just means to me, hey, I see it and it's a problem, but I'm going to pretend like it's not, because if I tell you that I see it, it's going to then you're going to know that it's a problem. But it's like, I already know that it's a problem for you if you're trying to tell me that you don't see it, just so that you don't have to acknowledge that it's there. It's always going to be there. I'm not just going to wake up one day like, well, bam, I'm suddenly able-bodied. Like,
Even
no,
though the Social Security Administration thinks that's possible.
there's, I mean, there's a story there.
Yeah, sorry, I
But
didn't
I
mean
think
to derail you.
No. That's totally fine. I think that people rush, like you said, they rush to say that they don't see the things that make them uncomfortable, when these aren't the things that should make us uncomfortable about people. These are the things that, sure, we notice and we, jot down in our heads, but it's not a thing that we should focus on. But it is a thing that we should acknowledge. Because you telling me that you don't see, color, or you don't see disability, just proves to me that you do see it, and it makes you uncomfortable. And I don't want to be the person that you feel like you have to be uncomfortable around every time you're around them, because you can't stop looking at my fingers, or you can't stop watching me limp across the room, or you can't unsee the fact that I'm black. Because the fact that I'm black and the fact that I'm disabled are two very distinct and important aspects of who I am. And so I think that is erasure, when you just choose not to see those two things that mean so much to me, even on, like, my days where I'm like, damn, I really wish that I was able-bodied. Like, it's still very much a thing that I can't, unsee, and I can't unlive with. So I would appreciate it if people would just acknowledge the fact that they see it, maybe ask a question, maybe.
Right, depends
And
on
then,
the question.
yeah, depends on the question, and then move on. I don't need to be sheltered in that way where you have to pretend like you don't see something that is clearly there.
Right.
I wonder if that answered your question.
No, that absolutely. I like I said, I didn't even actually have a question. I just wanted you to talk about it. But also, I mean, quote unquote, refusing, they're not seeing, let's say, not seeing race or ability also means that you're not seeing all of the, like, systemic issues that, right? Because on its own, your blackness and your disability, they're not bad things. They're features of who you are. They've gone into
Exactly.
shaping who you are. They're not negative qualities. Of course, people think that disability is, and plenty of people think race is too, but that's another can of worms. But
Yeah.
saying that you don't see race or you don't see disability means that you also don't see racism and ableism, and you don't see it built into the structures of everyday life and society, right? So, like, with the social model of disability, where instead of the disabled person having to meet the needs of an inaccessible world around them, the world around them adapts to help meet their needs. Like, that's very important and
Absolutely.
gets completely erased when you say, I don't see disability.
It absolutely does. That I'm so glad that you mentioned that, just because it reminded me of the time that when I was in college, I hosted this student, who's a wheelchair user, and she needed so many things that I didn't recognize, because I'm not a wheelchair user, so I didn't realize how much more she needed from the campus that, like, wasn't really offering it to her. She ended up going to She ended up going to the school, I think she said, because I showed her such a great time, which I was like, oh, thank you. But there's such an issue with accessibility, and I think that people think that just because they add some random ramp to their building outside and then there's nothing inside, that that's accessible. Like, no, that's not what accessibility is. There needs to be a broader conversation on what accessibility should and should not be, and there should be change in the way that it's discussed and then implemented into establishments, you know? And so I think that, like, that's something that, like, really bothers me as well. It's the lack of accessibility in the places that claim to be accessible.
Right.
And so that made me think about that. I don't mean to get off topic, but
oh no, that's the whole point of this show. Yeah, and if you're not seeing ability, you're not seeing accessibility or non-accessibility, then we can't have those conversations. The same way that if you're not seeing race and racism and everything that's connected to that, we can't have full conversations about race, especially in this country where everything is like so tied into our very long and dark history of extremely racist policies and, you know, slavery, kind of a big deal, and people don't want to talk about it. They say, oh, that was a long time ago, as if
that negates what happened. And it's so funny because they truly act like it was such a super long time ago, but it really wasn't that long ago.
I know. It's really fairly recent. And then you factor in the Reconstruction era, Jim Crow. Now we have, you know, the prison industrial complex and all of this stuff that's just really a long continuation of slavery and of, like, the consequences of slavery. And no one wants to have that conversation because, quote, it was a long time ago.
Yeah. And I think, again, I don't know, that reminds me of the idea about representation in media. And so I think my biggest issue sometimes is, like, and I don't know how much flack I'm going to give for this, but here we go, is that when Black people in particular receive any sort of acclaim for telling stories, it's always these slave stories or these stories about the help. And, like, it bothers me because there's other stories out there, but there's no real funding or room to tell them. And then, you know, if you get the funding or the room, you still don't get the acclaim that you deserve for those different stories. So, that's my thing too. It's like nobody wants to talk about slavery, but slavery also seems to be one of the only two things that, you know, Black actors can get acclaim for. So it's such a strange contrast.
Yeah.
Because you don't want to talk about it in real life, but you'll award, you know, a story told about it, and these stories are really wonderfully told. But it's like sometimes I think that people forget that Black people are more than slavery. Like, they're more than these stories about slavery, and I think that they're important to tell, absolutely. But I also think that it's frustrating when that's, you know, all that gets the attention.
Yeah, for sure. Which makes me think about, do you listen to the Another Round podcast from BuzzFeed? Love it. It's so good, isn't it?
Oh my God, they're a dream.
They really are.
I would really like to just have a drink with them.
I know. It makes me wish that I had, like, a fun co-host, but I digress. In one of their episodes, they were talking to Anil Dash. He is a tech guy. So they were talking about Aziz Ansari's Netflix show and about representation in that, and how, like, the lead character and his best friend are not white, which is just, I mean, it's so sad that in 2016 that's so groundbreaking, but it really is, you know.
It really is.
And I highly recommend that episode if anyone is interested.
Yeah, I do too. I really enjoyed that series. So yeah, go watch it.
Yeah. Like Anil was saying something about how, you know, their parents, their immigrant parents, went through so much just to like get food on the table and like, you know, to give their kids a better life. And up until his generation, like no one ever had the time or the energy or the privilege to just sit around and be like, but what if I told a story about it? You know, and then Tracy said, storytelling is a luxury. And that stood out to me and like is something that I kind of carry with me in doing the podcast, because it's something that I see very much in media and even in trying to book guests for this show. It's not that people of color and disabled people and any other marginalized groups don't have stories to tell. It's not that they don't want to tell the stories. And you mentioned all the issues with funding and exposure and all that. All of that is all like wrapped into this, but also telling a story, putting yourself out there takes, you know, energy and privilege and all of this stuff that you don't always have time for if you're constantly swatting away racism and ableism and like all of this other stuff. Those are very energy intensive, things to deal with on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
And also by putting yourself out there, like you talked about with participating in the Disability Too White hashtag, you're putting yourself out there for criticism, be it, you know, deserved or not, which usually it's not. But like it takes a lot of courage to say, my story matters and I'm going to put it out there.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think for me, a lot of the time it's like what I'll do is I'll write something and I'll pitch it and like hopefully, fingers crossed, you know, it'll be picked up and it'll be published and I'll feel so good about it for like a week. And then I'll be like, and then I'll stop to think and I'll be like, you know, you put so much time and work into this and it's so much effort and I'm so proud of you for that. But, you know, if somebody says something that's, like I have to prep myself, like if somebody says something that's, you know, dismissive or kind of rude to you, you can't let that be the thing that deters you. But sometimes, you know, sometimes it is. Mm-hmm. I think there's so much of it. We spend so much of our time as creatives, you know, writing and we're lucky enough to writing and doing art and finding different ways to tell our stories that I think sometimes we forget how much of ourselves, how much of the time it takes for us to tell these stories and how much of us it takes to tell these stories. And so yeah. I think what you're saying is so true. It's absolutely a privilege to tell stories. It's absolutely a privilege to, you know, find outlets and have outlets that let you tell your stories, but it's even more of a privilege to work past all of, you know, these, you know, like you said, incoming barriers to be able to tell that story. Mm-hmm. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah, no, that you articulated it better than I did.
But yeah, no, this has been amazing. I feel so honored that you even asked to talk to me about any of this. I really do. Oh. So thank you.
Well, I feel honored that you spent the time talking to me. Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of In Sickness and in Health. Find links to some of the stuff we talked about on the show page. And as always, find resources and more from us at insicknesspod.com and on social media at insicknesspod. You can find Keah and her writing online at keahbrown.weebly.com and on Twitter at Keah Maria. And don't forget to be excellent to yourselves and each other.